I took my tower defense platformer game and added local multiplayer to it. It's out now on Steam, so go check it out and maybe buy it if you're a good person looking to support indie developers. I've taken Toaster Defense to 2 conventions, and at both of them, the most commonly asked question was, will this be multiplayer? Actually, it was, will this be on the Switch, but that's not the topic of this devlog, so I'm choosing to ignore that for now. As a self-taught programmer, I was really hesitant to dive into local multiplayer while I was working on the game, since I was learning on the go. But now, I'm a professional programmer that can code almost anything, so I knew it was time to give the people their second most wanted thing. Before implementing a second player, I first researched the topic. I found out that pretty much every local co-op tutorial was using Unity's new input system. Problem for me is that my game wasn't. You see, with the old input system, simply adding in a second player in the game doesn't work since the controller will control both players. The new input system identifies which player has which controller and uses that respective input to control the player. Luckily, I just dabbled with the new input system during a recent game jam that I won, but also lost. So it didn't take an incredible amount of time, but I rewrote parts of my code to work with the new input system. Now that I had the game switched over to the new input system, I was ready to drop in a second player. On the first test, it worked as intended, but since this game was set up for single player, I had a bunch of work ahead of me. First, I had to ask myself a few questions. Number 1, how would the players interact with each other? And number 2, how would the game play with 1 player versus 2 players? For player interaction, I read a nice article about how fighting games set up their hit, hurt, and push boxes. I already had hit and hurt boxes in my game, so I thought it'd be really easy to add in a push box. Yeah, that didn't work for me. I think it's because I'm using character controllers rather than rigid bodies, but whatever. I opted to make it so that the players could pass through each other. However, the toast would hit other players. For the gameplay, the game functions as normal if there's only 1 player, but it will change if there are 2 players. I created a multiplayer manager that looks at how many players are currently on the map, and the game will adjust accordingly. Some things I needed to completely rework for 2 players are the camera, the turret building, and interacting with the toaster. The camera only used to follow Evan, who is controlled by player 1, but now that there is a second player, I need the camera to dynamically change depending on where the players are. I coded a new camera that would do exactly that. Only problem with that was that now it changed how much the map the players could see. I needed to go back into my levels and add new geometry where needed so players could no longer see out into the endless void. Changing the turret building system for 2 players took much longer than the camera. With 1 player, the game essentially pauses to let you select which turret you want to build. However, with 2 players, this needed to be real time. There are a lot of moving parts that went into this, and it took a lot of trial and error along the way, but instead of boring you with that, here are some of my favorite glitches from it. This glitch doubled the number of total players on the screen, this one sent the player 1 to the moon, and this one sent player 2 to the moon. Lastly, this one froze the player's animations for some reason. It just looks kinda goofy. Now that I had 2 players correctly functioning, it was time to create player 2's character named Ivan. I gave him the same body due to how the customization system was set up. He would be able to use all the same hats and skins as Evan. Due to that, the thing that had to make Ivan separated from Evan are the eyes. I put them much closer together and gave him a lovely unibrow. The concept behind the character is that he is a friend that begrudgingly helps, and I think that you can tell by his demeanor that he is very uninterested. A new character also means a new voice actor. I had my buddy, also widely known best streamer on Twitch, and the 2D character artist for the game, Dubers.
I don't mean to alarm anyone, but my butt be strong.
Lend his voice for Ivan, and he did a superb job. Take a listen to some of his voice clips.
Okay, I'm ready. Wait.
The new character took a little bit of setting up, but Evan and Ivan are truly the dynamic toaster oven duo. After Ivan was set, I ran into another issue that would take me a couple of days to solve. At this current state, if I were to start the game with 2 players, the game would randomly assign a controller to a player, meaning if player 1 used the keyboard and player 2 used the controller, there is a chance that when the level loads, the inputs could switch characters. I needed a way to carry the player's correct input to another scene in the project. It doesn't sound that hard, but the problem is that Unity's input system seemed to lack documentation, and no matter how hard I dug through all the documentation and various forums, I couldn't find a solution that worked for how my game was set up in particular. So I had to do some creative thinking. There's this thing in Unity called Don't Destroy Unload. If you haven't heard of it, it does exactly what it says. When loading the scenes, it will keep that object and carry it over to the next scene. I took my multiplayer manager, gave it the Don't Destroy Unload method, and made the player inputs children of the multiplayer manager. That way, when the scene changes, those inputs would come with me to the next scene, and when the new scene loaded, I had the game manager identify the players and assign them the correct inputs. I know it sounds really boring and technical, and at this point, viewers are probably expecting a LOL boring joke, but I wanted to explain how I solved this problem in case someone else is going through the same problem that I was and is looking for answers, because I know how frustrating it can be when you can't find the answers that you're looking for. Last thing I needed to set up for the local co-op was a player select screen. I created a simple menu, and when the join button was pressed, that controller would become the input for the first available spot. From there, the player can shuffle through hats and skins that they have unlocked. When I first set this up, it kept spawning hats as little tiny hats, which I thought was really funny. They're just so hilariously small, and I had to share that. Some of the non-co-op things I did for this update were adding strafing, which would allow a player to run backwards but face forwards to keep on shooting. I feel like this encouraged more running and gunning. The next big change I made to the game was the lighting. I adjusted the lighting for all the levels, some very slight like the space level, but others much more dramatic like the sewer level. Speaking of the sewer level, I'm actually very happy with the new lighting in this one. It makes it look more underground, which is what I was going for. That's it for the video. Drop a comment to let me know what you think of these new changes. If you liked the video, please subscribe for more game development content. I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.